What's up, everybody? Welcome to IGN Live's Pride Panel. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Michael Varrati. And Nicole Maines. I know they've got the fun little poops on them. Let me see if I can climb into this chair without falling on my face. We did it, everybody. Oh, thank you so much for joining us today, you two.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Ooh.
Like that.
So unfortunately, Margaret Cho was unable to join us today. However, she gave an interview in Out magazine last year where she talked about how comedy and queerness are intrinsically linked. And I think horror very much has the same thing as we go through our spaces and talk about those things. What can you say about that?
Well, it's interesting because I think there are horror purists who don't love the injection of comedy into horror, but when you break them down, they're kind of two sides of the same coin because they're mediums of heightened reality, and you can use that heightened lens to satirize or to critique or to comment on things. And so then inherently comedy and horror become political because you can use that lens to address the thing that maybe the mainstream does not want you to address.
Well, that and what is comedy except tragedy plus timing? So it's kind of right there in the name.
Right.
And I think that queerness goes intrinsically along with that because so much of our lived experience is kind of a horror. And how do we get through that except through laughter to hide real fear and pain?
Exactly. So Nicole, this next one is for you. Obviously, the scope of the roles are different, but how do you approach a role like Dreamer versus a role like Lisa when for Dreamer, her transness is integral to her character, whereas Lisa is simply a trans character?
Well, we don't actually know if Lisa is a trans character. That was never stated one way or the other. I never really considered whether or not she would be trans or not. That wasn't really her story. I think it's fun to be able to leave that up to the audience. Mm-hmm. Personally, as the performer, thinking about Lisa's backstory and her history, I don't know if her fucking Mary Kay selling mom would let her be trans. And that's real.
Right.
But I think the approach to both is approaching them as people. And I think that that's the key when we talk about representation on screen or in any form of media. What we want to see in these characters is seeing them portrayed as real people. And so while their transness or, lack thereof is part of their character, it's only one small facet. And that was one of the things that I really loved about Dreamer and about Nia, was because that was not the end-all be-all of her character, and that was not the most important thing that was going on in her day. Mm-hmm. She was a narcoleptic girl failure who just could not seem to figure out the scope of her powers, and that's interesting, and that's something that we don't get to see a lot with trans characters. I feel like so often we are pigeonholed into this one small part of who we are, when in reality, we don't think about it that much.
So we have got a few surprises for everybody in the room today, but the first one that we're going to start off with is the trailer for Michael Varrati's There Is a Zombie Outside.
Uh-oh.
Am I in the way? Do I need to move?
Nope.
Okay.
The whole point of this vacation is to do absolutely nothing, really?
Okay, what actually happened? There is a zombie outside.
It's the title.
Or at least something that looks like a zombie.
Maybe you've been watching too many of those movies.
Do you mind telling me what you were doing, taking a long nap in a house that doesn't belong to you?
Oh my God, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene.
To be clear, we are not done talking about all this.
Did you see it? That monster.
monster.
I don't like this. Any of it.
All right, then let's go take a look.
I'm sorry, what?
Zombies aren't real.
It's the only thing that makes sense. How else could it be everywhere that I am? And there was someone out there watching us, like hardcore.
Now, when you say hardcore.
Dig!
So, Michael, you wrote and directed this film. What made now the right time?
Well, when I wrote and directed this movie, I was coming out of a lot of meetings within the industry where people were telling me that queer stories weren't marketable or weren't, yes, boo indeed, or didn't necessarily have a place, or they just didn't make sense for a larger audience. And I have been fortunate in my career that I've gotten to work on big projects and small projects, television, film, but I've always, in my personal projects, wanted to return to queer stories because those were the stories that I needed that I didn't get when I was growing up. And during the pandemic, I was sitting at home and I was like, if not now, when am I going to get to tell the story about this subgenre of horror that means so much to me that I'm not getting to see? So I wrote this movie, and I got the group of people together that I do my short films with, and we, as a collaborative group, made this on our own. This was made outside of the studio system. It was made entirely independently, and it was made because we wanted it, and we felt like we needed it. We also knew for that reason it wouldn't be for everyone, but it was going to be for somebody, and that mattered so much. And so anytime people ask why now, it's sort of like, why not now? And I would implore other artists and creatives who are waiting to make the thing to just go make the thing. Because sometimes they'll give you money, sometimes they won't, but even if you make it for no money, someone somewhere needs it, and they're gonna want it, and it matters.
Where can the audience find There's a Zombie Outside?
It is on YouTube, Apple TV, and Amazon to rent, but as of this week, it's now free on Tubi, so you don't even have to pay for it, as well as it's available on Blu-ray.
We are not sponsored, but Tubi rules. All right, so we have another surprise for everybody here. We have an interview that happened off-site with up-and-coming multi-hyphenate queer creator Lovell Holder of the upcoming Lavender Men. He was interviewed by IGN's Lindsay Salzer. Let's roll to the clip.
So I wanted to ask, how do you think queer horror and queer cinema in general have evolved in recent years, and where do you see it going?
Even if it takes me an extra, as we can see now, 5 years to get this movie made, I would rather get the movie made with the configuration of characters that I have here than in a way that's kind of making it less interesting and less itself. So my hope is that queer filmmakers who are trying to operate within the horror space, which I fully encourage and I hope to do more of myself, I don't think that's the thing to compromise on. I think there are always compromises to be made in filmmaking. I'm a big believer that if anyone ever tells me, hey, we need to make this sexuality or this demographic something that is more, quote unquote, majority coded, it's kind of my automatic, then you're not the partner for this project. Thank you so much, though, for your time.
Right.
So I want to ask the same question of the two of you. How do you think queer horror has evolved in the last 5 years, and where do you want to see it go next?
I mean, I think horror has certainly in recent years become more explicitly for queer people. I think, of course, specifically speaking from a trans lens, I think we have often been portrayed as the monster. And now we are moving to a point where we get to be in on it, and we get to be more of the final girls, and we get to actually survive rather than be the scary, weird, gross man in a dress image that everyone's running from, even as that narrative continues to get pushed elsewhere. But I think, I mean, horror has always been, I think, a queer genre. I think our mainstream has always existed rather in the counterculture. And so I am very excited to see more and more stories get made like yours. I think it's perfect. I think it's exactly what we need, and I think it's where we thrive.
No, I like, Nicole, what you say about how horror has always been a queer genre, because I often say to people, the idea of queer horror essentially is kind of an oxymoron, because horror as a genre is the genre of the subversive. It is the genre of otherness. And queer people have been treated as subversive forever. We are used to being othered. So in this space, we have always found connection because inherently this genre of otherness speaks to us. And horror has been queer since before cinema. If you go back to Gothic literature, there was sapphic lesbian vampires preying the night. And I think the thing is that we just, over time, because of the way the industry is constructed, there were gatekeepers who tried to tell us something about what this was, even though they didn't represent the viewing demographic and the people who connected to it most. And what has been really wonderful is that, to your point, the closet door has been blown open, so to speak. So what used to be subtext is now just text. And that's a huge change, even from 5 years ago. But LGBTQIA is a lot of letters, and each one of those letters represents rich experiences and identities. And for every person that has been seen on film, there are so many people waiting to be seen. And I think that's where the work lies ahead, is that until we all have the content for us, there's still a lot of work to do.
So, do you think that if they remade Scream today, Billy and Stu would kiss?
I mean, I think that's the hope, right?
Right? I mean, come on. That's got to be where the goalposts are.
It's true, that's true. This is a PG show, right? Because...
No, I think this room is age gated, but I do hear a baby, so.
Okay, I was just gonna say, there is penetration in that last moment. Yeah, just not the way that we are talking.
Just not the way that he had maybe perhaps hoped.
You don't know what I'm talking about.
You're right, I don't.
Yeah, we don't
You don't know me.
No kink shaming. So, Nicole, your recent book, It Gets Better Except for When It Gets Worse, is the impetus for this question, but this is for both of you. There is so much weight on queer creators to be modelists, to be perfect, to be role models and trailblazers. How do we shirk that unbearable expectation while also continuing to move the conversation forward?
I mean, I think those two things go hand in hand. I think we move the needle forward by allowing ourselves the space to not be perfect and not exist as these model minorities. Because I think, as we have seen, that has never saved us, and that is never going to save us. There is no amount of virtue signaling or good role model being that is going to convince these people that we are worthy of our existence and we are worthy of a seat at the table. They have already decided on principle that we are to be excluded and that we're not enough. And I think that the next step we need to be making, and what I'm seeing, fortunately, in a lot of media and in a lot of auditions and scripts that I'm reading now, are we're seeing queer characters who are fuck-ups and who are not perfect and who are sometimes the bad guy and have problematic tendencies. And I think that that has value because it shows that we are just multifaceted people and that we do good things and we do bad things and that we have flaws and things that make us awesome, and we are human. I think to be flawed is to be human. And that's something I wanted to touch on in this book, and it's something that I like to touch on in the comics that I write as well.
Yeah, I mean, you said it so succinctly. The truth is that we have found appealing to the heteronormative mold doesn't work, and it's not authentic. But I think that what we are really finding and what audiences yearn for is queer truth. And when you work in a space where everybody's telling you that you always have to present the most positive, we as readers, we as creators, we as audience know that's not always true. And so I would go to queer film festivals, and there would always be this impetus where it's got to be queer affirmation, queer joy, queer jubilance. But the truth is, I'm queer pissed sometimes. I'm queer mad, I'm queer sad. And if that's not being represented, then we're not representing ourselves accurately. And so I think that, to Nicole's point, we just have to be out there telling the truth. Yes, once upon a time when we were only represented as the monster, we needed more, but now luckily that's not the case. So I think what we're asking for is nuance. Really, we deserve that.
Very well said.
We need to see Buffalo Bill's side of the story. Because that was just a doll trying to get estrogen.
Right.
You know?
Right.
What else was she supposed to do?
Yeah.
I'm not saying I condone it. I'm just saying, like, been there.
Yeah, sometimes. Sometimes that's just how it goes. We have got another snippet from our Lovell interview.
There may not always be, queer character in every film, just in general, right? But when you think of, iconic films and some of your favorites, if you had the chance, would you rewrite any characters as queer? And if so, who would it be?
I mean, this particular story is public domain, so I don't feel like I'm necessarily sacrificing this idea in any capacity, because truly anyone could do this. But I've always been curious to see a contemporary Jane Austen type of like someone taking Sense and Sensibility and setting it in a contemporary framework where maybe one of the sisters is queer. Either she's a queer woman,
right,
or it's now a gay brother or something like that, and kind of riffing off those kind of 1800s marriage market stories, because I do still think so many of those themes can be easily applied. I know Fire Island kind of dabbled with it a little bit.
Yeah.
And I thought, I was like, ooh, that's so juicy. I was like, I want more.
I feel like we already touched on this a little bit with Bill and Stu, but we're gonna hop back into it. Both of you, if you could rewrite a character as queer, who would you want it to be?
So I co-host a podcast with drag icon Peaches Christ, and we talk about cult films every other week. And frequently, we just talk about how everything we love we think is queer, even if it's not in the main text. So I feel like many times I've maybe cast something as queer that probably wasn't the intention of the author. So that's a great question. I think Dracula is already a queer text, but I would like to see a queer Van Helsing, because he's already really pressed about this guy. So just let him go.
You ate with that. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if this is technically rewriting, because they banged in the book, but Gelfie 2025, Glinda Elphaba, let's go, for good. I want to see him kiss.
You're right. I also, it kind of goes back to, what you were saying about, they did actually bang, so, you're not really rewriting anything, but it goes back to, the Lisa conversation. It explicitly says, Elphaba is a hermaphrodite, but, sometimes it's just implied, and that is A-okay. I think every great panel should have homework for the audience. Don't you agree? Yeah? All of you seem really thrilled about that. So I wanted to ask the two of you to shout out a piece of queer art, whether it be film, television, books, whatever, that you think is essential.
Well, there is a trans filmmaker in Australia. Her name is Alice Mayo McKay, and Alice is as far as I'm concerned, not only the now of queer horror, but the future of queer horror. She started making movies at 17, and her work is not only the representation that we're talking about here on this stage and the kind of things that we are saying we yearn to see, but it's so smart and hip. And she made this movie called T-Blockers, which I love. And it's about a trans teen who realizes that something is causing the people in her neighborhood to become these violent, enraged sort of like zombies. It's so good. And she gathers her friends, and they are like this group of queer revolutionaries. It's like Spring Breakers meets Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Vigilante T-girls.
Yeah, it's like what Pride is all about.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it. I think she's great, so I'm shouting Alice out.
I'm into the queer power fantasy of it all. Yes. I think a mandatory piece of queer viewing should be, this is kind of classic, and I don't know if you haven't already watched it, but the documentary Paris is Burning is a really great place to start if you don't know a lot about like the ballroom scene and like just queer history of the 80s and 90s. I think that's a great place to start. As well as there's a great documentary on Netflix called Disclosure that documents the history of trans representation in TV and film going way back to the silent films of the 1920s all the way up to present day. And it really talks about the way that our view of trans people as a society has been manufactured to view us as the monster or as something to be grossed out by or afraid of or laugh at. In films like Ace Ventura and Silence of the Lambs and Sleepaway Camp, in Psycho, Norman Bates. It's really, really interesting, and I had a really good time watching it.
So, Michael, you've got your zombie movie that is out already. Nicole, you've done Bit. I say that like you haven't done every genre of horror, because that's just what you do. Still, all the same. What subgenre do the two of you want to hop into next?
I haven't gotten to do a slasher yet, and I really, really want to. I really want to die a horrible, gruesome, awful death. Or to be the killer. Or both.
Or both. Yeah, there's always two.
You know, it's funny, every time I get asked this question on a panel, my mind instantly goes to one place, and it's the most Pride Month answer. But we need more horror musicals. So I don't know.
About that.
Yeah, I think maybe a singing slasher.
I'm sad.
Yeah, there we go.
I'll be there.
Slash.
Will you please write a horror slasher comedy musical for me, please?
Yes, okay.
Thank you.
That'd be so good.
All right, sure.
We're gonna get everyone. We're gonna get Jeremy Jordan. We're gonna get Christian Chenoweth.
Kristen Chenoweth could give such like Mrs. Voorhees vibes, right? Like
Yes! Or Laurie Metcalf in Scream 2.
Yeah.
Oh.
She's the best.
That's my favorite, I think, villain monologue of any movie. The one where she's like, any questions, any comments? You know what? Who gives a flying fuck?
And in her power suit.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Debbie Salt doesn't exist.
So, forgive me, I am going to read off cards for this next bit because I don't want to mess up any of your other recommendations. But speaking of those recommendations, we have asked each of our panelists which queer organizations mean a lot to them, and we wanted to shout out each of those orgs before we go. We also included Margaret's because, just because she's sick today doesn't mean we don't want to shout out a great organization that everybody can help. So, first up, we have Nicole is bringing awareness to the EQCA, which advocates for the civil rights and social justice of LGBTQ folks. Michael is bringing awareness to the Trevor Project, which focuses on suicide prevention efforts for queer youth. And again, although Margaret could not join us today, we wanted to bring awareness to the Ali Forney Foundation, which works to protect queer youth from homelessness. And as you can see from this graphic behind us, you can scan these QR codes to find out more about any of those given orgs. And we do have one more surprise for everybody. Underneath one of the seats in the crowd, we have a, oh, no, we don't have the t-shirt. I'm gonna throw the t-shirt at you. You have a sticker, a sign, a thing. It's not Oprah. It's not the flag, Rosie, though I do love that flag. Who's got it? Second or third row? Anybody? There we go. Winner. Hold on. I'm gonna stand up so I don't hit this guy in the head.
Good penmanship on winner.
Ready?
I know. Straight person did that.
Well, I didn't try to assault somebody,
Yeah.
just for the record. All right, you guys, thank you so much for your time today. Audience, thank you so much for joining us. Stick around for more IGN Live.